Self-care tip, you never want to be a presenter and leave your mic on during the break. You can get, I've had trauma induced that way. All right, well, I hope everyone had a wonderful break. Get to connect with each other and visit some of the tables here for our fantastic sponsors and get some resources. Resource sharing, I love resource sharing. I love getting to know what's out there. There's a lot of wonderful people doing great things in our communities. All right. So now we're going to get to a really this was fun for me to put together. Again, like I said, I've gone from conventional to a little bit unconventional teaching style, but again, I hope that you're going to remember some of this today. I know my students certainly do, but I want to make it really clear that even though it seemed kind of light and playful, what we talk about here is kind of really serious stuff. So we're just using art as a medium to really teach and enhance things. I mean, how many people watch movies and go, oh my gosh, did you see that scene when in terms of endearment, she was talking to her mom? Does anybody remember the Sally Fields scene with Weezer? So, I mean, we have moments, teaching moments in films, comics, and literature that can really help us. So today we're going to use film, these comic films, to talk about the villains of self-care versus some heroic. So we're going to talk about awareness, and we're going to talk about tools. Now, I don't know how many people here have seen Batman movies, but I absolutely, phenomenally love Jack Nicholson as the Joker, okay? He's like one of my favorite Joker characters. He does a great job. And then Michael Keaton's Batman is pretty good. I do like Ben Affleck's Batman, and Christian Bale, but Michael Keaton is really good. So today we're going to raise awareness about the villains, and we're going to see, they come in teams. So we're going to see what villains the Joker brings and how Batman uses some powers to respond, or tools. What I like about this is that, if we are all going to kind of don the Batman persona a little bit, every good superhero needs what? A lot of things, but a utility belt, right? So, to carry your tools in. So, let's get started. So, what does the Joker present? One of the very first things that on the Joker's team is the time thief, all right? So what does this villain whisper to you? This villain whispers, you're always on call and there's no time for you. How many people get visited by the time thief a lot? Anyone? Yeah. So how does this villain typically appear? Long hours and really constant demands. And here's an example in the real world. A bereavement counselor, after a full day of sessions, receives a crisis call from a family experiencing sudden loss. They feel guilty because the family seems to feel comforted by their steady guidance. Instead of transferring them to the on-call crisis worker, they extend their workday several hours to provide immediate support. Now, that is a real-world example I think probably resonates with some of us. So how does Batman respond to that? I love this. I found this actually on the internet. So it must be one that they use in set boundaries. It's a tool that's really, really hard for a lot of us, and myself included. So let's talk a little bit about setting boundaries. So in order to set boundaries, we have to kind of reframe back to ourselves that we have to trust that we are providing team-based care. By not kind of handing off to the next person or the warm handoff, we're kind of saying, well, maybe I don't trust that people on my team can really do the care that I can do, So it's a little bit of letting go of self and letting go of ego and trusting the team that you're with. And just reminding yourself that passing care on to your team is not abandoning a person. It's not. It's hard. I mean, when you engage with somebody on the phone, they feel they're in distress, they feel comforted by your voice. Doing a warm handoff is very different than doing an abrupt one. So there's ways that we can do a warm handoff to our team member. And it's also ensuring that the patient receives the best support possible. If you're extending your time, you know that the time thief is always going to kind of be in the back of your mind saying, okay, it's 6:30, 7 o'clock, you probably need to get home, the dog needs to get let out. So the power of boundaries and setting boundaries is that it protects our time. Who protects those who protects others? We have to protect ourselves. So it protects our time, and it creates space for rest, and it honors our breaks as essential. So I can give an example of this. When I began in this field as an oncology social worker, and I think that I always still feel I am at the heart of being an oncology social worker. It drew me into the field and absolutely had the most fantastic and wonderful teams that I worked in. And when I first worked at the Cancer Center in Pennsylvania up at UPenn, I had a supervisor. I was a fairly newly minted social worker. And she said to us, she was our supervisor, you will not stay past 5 o'clock at night, because we carried pagers. You will not stay past 5 o'clock at night. That pager will go on your desk, and if I catch you staying past 5 o'clock at night, it will go on your report. You'll be noted for it. You'll be cited for it. I was like, whoa, she's really harsh. Well, she said, care is 24/7, and I need to protect my team. And so I have to put down that boundary for you so that you could have that boundary for yourself. And at the time, I thought that was kind of overly harsh, but I understand why she did it now. Because it was really to protect us from being burnt out and working in a hospital where care was 24/7. So we have to be mindful of being asked to overextend our hours too. Sometimes it's okay. It's not saying I have to be so over boundary that I never extend my hours, right? But we may have to also advocate for our schedule. Practicing no without feeling guilty. Not now without guilt. I don't know. Anybody here struggle with that? That's kind of a hard thing. Not saying no. Yeah, I see some hands being raised. Saying no without guilt. Now, here's one that I actually like that I did learn too, working in hospital, was sometimes self-care. People think I can't self-care because self-care is like I have to go do yoga, I have to go on a retreat, I have to go get a massage, all great things. I'm not downplaying these at all. But sometimes being able to use micro breaks. And what I mean by that is stepping away, stretching, going to the bathroom, walking, taking a step outside. There are times when I haven't even, when I worked in hospital too, even stepped outside to breathe the fresh air, just to go in and out. Another supervisor of mine a long time ago taught me something, and if you look at my desk anywhere I work, I have scented hand cream right next to my desk. And I do that because it grounds me. And then I'll just rub my hands, because I hold a lot of stress in my hands, and I'll smell the aromatherapy, and it gives me a bit of a micro break. So kind of setting that boundary for yourself during the day. What breaks am I taking for myself? And they don't have to be long. And scheduling protective downtime like any kind of appointment. I do actually practice that. It's very important for me. All right, who's the next thief that shows up? The Joker's showing up with his team. He likes to throw a lot of thieves at you. It's the compassion drain. Well, this is a big one, right? This one's scary. So the compassion drain, always the villain says, if you step away, you're letting everybody down. We need your compassion. We need you. You're so good at what you do. We need you. So how does this villain often appear? Chronic exposure to other people's pain drains you emotionally. Secondary trauma, even small amounts of stress feel overwhelming. You feel overly numb and detached. You're not refueling, you're on empty. Even if you've got all the compassion in the world, you're gonna get drained of your compassion. I remember after my daughter was born, and she was a preemie, one of the neonate nurses coming in to the hospital and saying, what kind of support, because we were a military family, what kind of support do you have at home? What kind of support do you have for friends? And she was asking me, and she goes, it's important. It's important you get breaks, because what is something you love to do, Jill? And I'm like, well, I'm a basketball player. I love to play basketball. She goes, do you love playing basketball 24 hours a day? I was like, heck no, I don't like playing basketball 24 hours a day. After a while, I love shooting foul shots, but I get sick of shooting foul shots. She goes, that's parenting. If you're doing this 24/7 and you don't get a break, you're gonna burn out. And that gets translated not just to you, but to your child. And so your compassion's gonna be drained. And being a new mom, that was really important to hear because I needed to refuel myself in order to be the caregiver that I wanted to be to my child. So a real world example here in our world is James is a funeral director. After back-to-back services for children, he feels emotionally drained, but continues working without pause, leading to a lot of irritability to staff. So, what does Batman say? I love this one too, because I found all of these on the internet, right? And they're all cited in here, DC Comics and stuff. But I was like, man, Batman, there are examples of Batman doing rest and renewal. It's important. So, this power restores our emotional reserves through joy, gratitude, restorative practices. I'm married to someone who's, I'm not kidding, this is not a joke. He works, he's in the civilian side now. He works somewhere in DC in a building that I can't go to. Puts his phone in a cell block, blah, blah, blah. We don't talk much about what he does during the day. He comes home every day, and even though he was a combat veteran where he was doing a lot of physical exercise, now I call him a combat intellectual that sits at his desk a lot and analyzes things, blah, blah, blah. I don't really know because we're not able to talk about it. That's a whole other therapy session for me, but, being married to somebody who disappears. But kind of like a superhero. You don't really know what mission they're going on. But when he comes home, one of the things he does after always putting on his sneakers, I'm like, but you're kind of wearing these now shoes that look like sneakers. The shoes now, the men's shoes that look like sneakers, the Kenneth Cole ones. But he's got problems with his feet, so he puts on sneakers. And then we have these lazy boy chairs at the end of the night. I'll always find him in the lazy boy chair. I'm frantically running around doing the laundry and everything. But there's something to it. It's rest and renewal and recharge. He's a little more introverted than I am. I'm an extrovert. I derive my energy from frenetically relaxing, but I've had to really learn to ramp it down. So rest and renewal is important. It could be something simple like sitting in your favorite chair. It could be something like staring at the moon outside. It could be something that gives you a little bit of joy. It can be making a night, if you're able to do it. Not everybody is. We've instilled every Wednesday night is a dinner night. We go out to dinner. It is in there. It gives a little rest. It gives a little renewal. The villain says to you, when the villain says that, that's not my truth. What you say to that villain is, that's not my truth. That everybody needs me. Everyone needs my compassion all the time. That's the voice of burnout talking to me. Maybe that's also a little bit of my own ego talking to me, that I'm needed all the time. So some of the activities you can engage in, something that gives you rest and relaxation. I know that when I used to sit on the board of ADEC, I'm a knitter myself. We sit in these board meetings, okay. A lot of board meetings, not just ADEC, but a lot of them sometimes, you doodle. I saw someone yesterday doodling, knitting. I'm still listening. I'm actively listening, but it's actually mindful concentration. Knitting, connect with supportive peers. I know someone shared with us yesterday, which was really wonderful, that outside of their work in the funeral business, that they make sure that they do activities with peers that aren't in the funeral business. So I think that's really important to diversify, if we can, and practice grounding skills like mindfulness, prayer, meditation. My mindfulness, and I love this, someone else shared this yesterday, because I do this as well too, is I sing while I'm in my car driving. And that is, I know people are probably staring at me, especially songs that I really, really like, I get really passionate about. But that to me is sacred time in the car. When I worked at the cancer center, and this was back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I deliberately parked in the parking lot. I could have gotten access to the closer parking lot. I got access to the parking lot that was a little further away. so I could purposely walk to my car so that I could process all the things that happened during the day. And when I got in the car, I listened to the music, and by the time I got home, all the stuff that happened that day, I had to really practice a lot of mindfulness, I had to make a conscious effort to then close the door on that portal. We're going in different portals, and we're talking about dimensions. A lot of dimensions in superhero films. I had to walk from one portal to the other. Now, this is the one, again, I've shared. In my professional life, I've worked with military service members. I'm also the daughter of a New York City firefighter, granddaughter of a New York City policeman, married to a combat veteran, been around a lot of people, social worker. The stoic mask, okay? The stoic mask is definitely, can be a villain. And especially, working in a large medical center, doctors, nurses, the stoic mask can appear a lot in our profession. This says, the villain says, others need you. Professionals never show weakness. Does anybody here know the professions that have the highest, I want to say, rate, not incidence of suicide? Anyone know? All right, I'm going to pass the microphone around only because I can't hear people. Is this on? Here we go. Can someone pass this? Would you be my volunteer?
I'll be glad to.
Thank you.
I'll be glad to. Feels good to stretch.
I'm sorry?
She said dentist, veterinarian.
She said law enforcement.
Number 1, doctors and dentists. Okay, I think we've had a lot, and we've had a lot in the top numbers. So doctors and dentists, veterinarians, law enforcement. Here's one that you might not really think of, construction workers. I have a good colleague by the name of Dr. Sally Spencer. She works with a lot of the construction, bringing awareness to construction workers. So a lot of people in the helping professions, medical professions, helping professions, because we're showing up for others, but also the culture of our profession, we wear a stoic mask. And I'm going to unmask myself for a minute, that I even feel very seriously that it happens in my grief and loss profession. I've had several losses in the last several years, and colleagues I know have had several losses of pets, of family members, significant losses. But because we're in the grief and loss world, yes, we're understanding, but you're supposed to adapt. You need to show up for other people. And so sometimes that stoic mask shows up because there's the cultural expectation that we need to stay composed, which is true on some level. If we cannot do our work because we're suffering so much, it does bring into question, should we be doing our work? Do we have the capacity to be doing our work? I've actually told some people that I think they should either take a leave of absence or reconsider. I've told students and supervisees to reconsider what they're doing. Vulnerability is seen as unprofessional. I know this to be true a lot in the medical world, that doctors and nurses carry a lot on their shoulders, and vulnerability just also because of the culture. And there's a culture in some professions, I want to say the military has it, there's a saying that they eat their young. And so showing vulnerability shows weakness. And showing weakness doesn't look good to your peers who sometimes have to evaluate you and evaluate your performance. You are always trying to get what the military would call a number 1 fit rep. You want to be the number 1 surgeon, you want to be the number 1 doctor, you want to be the number 1 nurse. So maybe the number 1 social worker. I am supposed to be in a field where I'm helping people, I cannot show any sign, sometime, of emotion. So that mask creates an emotional distance. Masks aren't always bad, but again, it's all about balance, right? We can't show up to a client and be just an emotional mess. What is that? We can't help others if we're not helping ourselves, if we're not in balance. But sometimes we overuse the mask. So here's a real-world example. A funeral home worker suppresses their own tears when they hand off an urn of ashes to a young spouse whose husband was tragically killed in a military accident. His nephew died in the military just 2 years ago. As the weeks go on, he's having trouble sleeping and concentrating and avoids seeking support, peer or professional, to process his feelings due to perceived or real professional cultural stoicism. Now, this is what he seeks. He avoids seeking support, peer or professional. Okay. Peers, it's important to find safe peers. Feeling like people that are safe. And that is important because we don't want our confidence being betrayed by somebody else. That can be really devastating to us. So feeling safe that we can share those feelings with another colleague is really important. But what I say to that, to this example, that he's afraid of seeking professional help. I'm going to say this to everybody. You don't have to tell anybody. It's none of their business. None of their beeswax. Do you need to tell anybody that you're going for professional help? I think that's something that's really more your perceived embarrassment, your perceived guilt, your perceived stoicism, your perceived issues with your own. You do not have to tell anyone that you're going to see a therapist. If anything, it is a sign of weakness is not strength leaving the body. Okay? Strength is actually leaning into your weakness. It's leaning into it. It's asking for help. It takes a lot stronger person to kind of ask for help than someone who just defers it or denies it. It really does. And it really does especially from the persons who are supposed to be helping other people emotionally or psychologically. Like I said, sometimes having the knowledge that I have about what I do has been helpful to me and hurtful to me. Because when I've been going through my own losses, pain, and stress, I self-evaluate a lot harder on myself than I would somebody else. I'm less compassionate with myself. So hit yourself with a feather and not a stick. So taking off the mask, all right? It's hard. When Batman takes off the mask, he's got to kind of reveal himself. Taking off a mask can be kind of revealing. The villain's voice says, stay strong no matter what. Don't let anyone see you break. Your job is to hold it all together. I've had times where I've said, I got the news where a friend died and I was with the client. And I said, excuse me a second, I'll just be back in a few minutes. And I went outside. I had to excuse myself. I actually had to cancel the session for the rest of the day. If you show your emotion, you'll let people down. That's what the villain's voice tells you. The stoic mask protects in the moment. It does. It can protect in the moment. But if overused, it can drain you over time. And so the hero's reframe on that, the self-care mask, is my humanity is my true strength. Okay? I know that I have to employ stoicism in some moments. I really do. I know I have to be reserved in some moments. I know I have to model some strength for people in moments. But taking breaks makes me more present. Sharing with trusted peers is courageous. Trusted peers. And I say that coming from a place where I'm a very trusting person. I've had to learn over time, as one of my former supervisors told me. She's like, you're a very trusting person. Be careful about that. I was like, what does she mean by that? Am I supposed to not be trusting? But just be careful. So, boundaries protect my compassion. Taking off the mask is not a failure. It's my humanity is truly my superpower. So trusted peers and professional support. We're not made of stone. We're not the robots in the beginning of the film, which eventually they become more humanized, by the way, just FYI. Oh, I'll go back for a second. Yep. So again, how to use that superpower. Sometimes Batman has to take off the mask. Who does Batman take the mask off in front of? Very leery. Robin, Alfred, eventually Batgirl. Trusted people, very few people, but trusted. People that are in his occupation, people that are trusted, they're like family, they know him, so he's able to reveal his true identity. So the next villain of self-care is the guilt tripper, okay? So some of us in our lives can be Jedi masters of guilt. I don't know if any of them raised by the Jedi master of guilt, either practice guilt ourselves. So guilt is something that is, again, both helpful and harmful. But the guilt tripper is a villain that says, how can you rest when families are suffering? You feel guilt over not being able to fix your clients, right? I don't feel guilt about that anymore. There's a great book to read by Megan Devine. I just actually got it, called How to Carry What You Cannot Fix. And when I got into social work, I thought one of my superpowers was, I could be helpful to people. I could get them resources, which is good. You could help fix some practical stuff that way. But I didn't really think I got into fix, but I started learning that I kind of liked to fix. Instead of just part of our job is the power of presence, is to be. And I had a woman who, when I worked in radiation oncology, she was about my age now. She was an Italian immigrant. She spoke very little English. I speak very little Italian. And they'd bring her down for radiation oncology every day. Nobody ever really came. She came down to get to radiation every day. And she would ask for me. I was a student. And she would ask for me. And I would just sit with her. I'd wait for her to get through her radiation treatment. Then I'd sit with her. And I'd go back and I'd walk her up the floor. And I went to my supervisor in my supervision session that week. And on my process recordings, I had sat with client, quiet. Sat with client, walked her up. I'm like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything with this patient. She goes, that's because you're trying to fix something, Jill. What are you trying to fix? I'm like, I don't know. Does she want to talk about something? Does she want to process something? Does she want to talk about her pain? Does she need resources? She goes, what you're doing is really powerful. And I said, what is that? She said, you are sitting in hell with her. You're giving her the power of your presence. But I was feeling guilty I wasn't doing anything. And that really struck with me, that presence. The presence. Alan Wolfelt talks about companioning the bereaved, right? We are on a journey when we enter the landscape of loss. And I always say, if someone says they're a grief expert, first of all, I know a lot about grief because I work with grieving people. I know about my own. I don't know about yours. I invite you to bring me into your world and share it with me. If anybody ever calls themselves a grief expert, people try to say to me, well, she's a speaker, she's a grief expert. Run in the other direction. Just run. Because there is no grief expert. Yes, do people know about loss and grief? Absolutely. Have I worked with thousands of people? Are there some commonality? Absolutely. But when you met one grieving person, you've met one grieving person. There's individual. Whereas this individual is our fingerprint. So getting back to guilt, oftentimes guilt shows up by, feeling selfish for prioritizing our own needs. I am terrible with this. I do it at home all the time. Everybody else's needs come first. But I make sure I put my medical needs first. It's really important to me, especially in my middle age here. Rest, vacations, or even short breaks are viewed as luxuries. Does anybody here feel like a vacation is a luxury? All right, we got to work on that. Can you bring the microphone over? And thank you for sharing that, by the way, because not a lot of people will admit that they think vacation is a luxury.
I take lots of vacations.
Okay.
I don't look at it as something that I have to make myself do. I
Okay.
take vacations because I want many vacations to take care of me.
Good. Excellent. I like that. So rest, vacations, short breaks are even a luxury. They are not. That is the rest and renewal we all need. Remember, if we did, even what we loved, if you love eating chocolate, if you're doing it 24/7, first of all, a lot of bad things are probably going to happen to your body. And secondly, you're not going to like it very much anymore, and you're going to become burnt out from it. Sometimes in our profession, we have this core belief. CBT talks about core beliefs and values, that good caregivers never step away. Well, good caregivers do step away. And we have a fear of letting others down. And that's okay. A fear of letting others down can, again, in balance, just like preparing for this presentation this week. Everyone's like, why are you putting so much pressure on yourself? I said, because when I show up, I'm very responsible. I want to make sure that people have a significant, good, and engaging learning experience. But I also can't work myself up that I let the guilt tripper say many things in my head that you're not doing a good job, making yourself too nervous. So it's really important that we understand in working with individuals and families, we are only human and we can only do so much. And we do have time in our day that we do need to then put stuff aside and focus on ourselves and hand things off to a team. So here's a real-world example. A bereavement coordinator cancels a long-awaited vacation because they feel guilty leaving their team and the grieving families that they support. I know that's especially hard. It's really, really especially hard. I don't know why, and I actually do know why. I'm gonna step that back for a second. For some reason, Fridays at 4 o'clock are always the time when things present themselves. Like the patient or the client that's in distress at 4 o'clock on a Friday, the maybe client who, starts saying things about self-harm at 4 o'clock on a Friday, or the one that sends you an email while you're on vacation in Florida, the first one you've taken since the pandemic, and you say that email is not to be used for any type of crisis, and tells you that they're in crisis over email. Do you respond to that? Do you not respond to that? So anyhow, what does Batman employ with this? Okay, what's in the tool belt? Permission. Permission is really, really powerful. First of all, we have to give ourselves permission. When permission is the power that reframes self-care as a duty. It's not a luxury. I like that vacation. I don't see it as a luxury. I go on many vacations, okay? It's a duty, and it removes guilt from restoration. Permission, give ourselves permission. It's okay. Permission is sometimes hard. It's hard for caregivers because we know we're showing up for others and we're supposed to be doing for others. Permission to remove that guilt that we're not bulletproof, we're not invincible, and we have our own vulnerabilities and we need our own care, kind of sometimes is not hardwired in our brain. So when my supervisor at the cancer center told us to put our pagers down at 5 o'clock, that was an amazing show of leadership. It was an amazing show of leadership because she was saying, I am creating a culture and a climate that says it's okay to stop work at 5. I give you permission. And that is something I'm modeling for you. So it was important to draw on her leadership to send that message that it was okay. And to learn it for yourself. It's okay that I have an end of my day. So how do we often use permission? Remind ourselves, if you need to, if you have a hard time doing it internally, okay, use your external code of ethics. I always learned in social work, if you have to say no sometimes to a client, blame it on policy. Not my fault, it's the policy. It's the policy. Well, if it's really hard for you, if you struggle with this, with permission, it's policy, okay? Even though sometimes I feel like our organizations, our professional organizations, we were just talking about this at break, sometimes need to really advocate for us a little bit more, advocate for some of the things in our codes, but give us permission as social workers and other care professionals not to feel embarrassed to ask for salaries that really meet our cost of living. We shouldn't be embarrassed about that. Maybe they can advocate for us a little bit more, but that comes in another slide. Maybe using affirmations, caring for myself. If it's really hard for you, and I often use this with my bereaved parents who are caring for children, they say, I'm grieving, but I want to take care of my kids. How can I take care of myself? And, especially I'm going to say with spouses or partners that want to date again, they feel like it can be selfish when they have young children. And how can I go out on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night or even think about going out with somebody else when my children are grieving their father? Or isn't that selfish of me? They've lost so much. Maybe I shouldn't go out at night or go meet other people or do an activity. But caring for yourself as a parent allows you to also care for the people that you're responsible for. So refraining that for yourself. Plan and honor vacation. Days off are ethical practice. And encourage a values that, incorporate breaks, not martyrdom. And again, I think that's really hard in society. If you go on social media, I feel like there's two kind of worlds. There's not like a balance in between. There's two worlds. There's a world where everyone's doing everything fun, and I'll even admit when I get on there, I get a little FOMO. Like, wow, they're on the Appalachian Trail. They're in Alaska. I actually have to take social media breaks because I feel like I'm not doing enough fun things. And then professionally, I've had to stop looking at LinkedIn sometimes because I'm like, wow, the little bit of my competitive, they're doing this and they're presenting that. And whoa, slow yourself down, okay? So we are in a world that kind of promotes a bit of extremism on both ends of work and social activities. So it's really important that we try to break that value that we're all about work. So our next villain that's going to show up is, I love this one, the overlord of obligation. And sometimes the overlord is very, very present in our lives and in our jobs. I don't know about you all, but when I go home and I enter a different dimension, I got a whole new list of things and tasks and other things of obligation that I have to do. So, I don't know if I have 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs. So rest and renewal is when do I actually plan time for that? But I have to be intentional about it because I can let it slip real fast because the overlord of obligation is saying responsibilities, work, always come first. You gotta do. So how this villain appears can be, quite frankly, financial pressure. That's a reality. Again, I said, most of us don't get into our profession for the huge, major corporate salaries that we're making, okay? As a social worker, I not only, in the beginning, worked 1 job, I think I worked 3 jobs. I did moonlighting, I had a full-time job, I had a part-time job, I had a lot of jobs. Staff shortages, that's very real for a lot of agencies and folks. Staff shortages right now, the nursing world, okay? My daughter was just in the hospital in downtown Washington, D.C., because she had hip surgery. I had to wheel her out of the hospital by myself because they did not have persons when she was getting discharged from the emergency room. It was over 90 minutes we were waiting for someone to wheel her out. I said, she signed her discharge papers, I'm gonna wheel her out myself. We're not a prisoner. But I felt bad because the nurses typically now are tasked with, this is a major level 1 trauma center in the middle of Washington, D.C., They normally now are tasked with wheeling patients out, but, they weren't available because they're attending to 50,000 things plus the 5 traumas that just came into the ER. So staff shortages are real in a lot of our professions. So it's hard. Sometimes we are pulling the job of 1 or 2 or 3 people. Sometimes, again, it's the internal mindset. We have this personal mindset of self-sacrifice. We do have some endless tasks. I will tell you that one of the practices that I practice, even at work, is I will, if I can't get every single task, I prioritize by doing a hierarchy of tasks and I triage it, the most immediate ones first, and then what could be left over and put on a shelf, goes on a shelf for a different day, and it goes on a different task list. But here's a real world example. A funeral home owner skips days off for the year because there's always something more to do. There's always going to be something more to do. And that's hard. That's hard, especially when you own your own business. So discernment. That's kind of Batman sitting up there. Really, should I go into this situation or should I not? Discernment and boundaries. So discernment and boundaries helps us. It cuts through the noise and the illusion. It reveals the truth. It clarifies our motives. It helps us guide our choices. It kind of helps us give us an X-ray vision on our priorities. The voice that's back is it helps us to see through that everything is urgent. I got to do this. I got to do that. Again, I relax typically when I go on vacation. Not anybody here, but my husband always says to me, he's one of these people that could just go to the beach, sit with a book, and just melt into the sand. I have to find every activity under the sun before I wind down for 2 days. Let's go play volleyball. Let's get in the pool. Let's take a walk on the beach. That's my energy level. It needs to be ramped down. And so having discernment and boundaries about that helps you to see that maybe everything is not urgent. Triaging. Delegate instead of carrying everything alone. Sometimes, too, that cuts into the core of our control issues. Sometimes I feel like I could do things better myself than other people can and get them done, and then I'll have to ask and show people. So delegate. Delegating really means trust. Trust that it will get done. Sometimes trust that it will get done in not the way you necessarily would do it, but it's still good. It's still good. I have a hard time with that. It also protects family and personal time as non-negotiable. Why is it that we can always cut into our family and personal time and it's totally okay? It's okay. It should be a non-negotiable sometimes. This is my boundary. I had a boundary in my career that I would never work Sundays. I was fortunate in some regards. I did when I worked in nonprofit. I've had a lot of different things on my resume, a lot of diversity. Sometimes when we did fundraising events, especially for cancer organizations, I had to work Sundays. But my boundary on that was that I worked out with my boss, was that, I wouldn't work for a place that would not give you exchange time, meaning that exchange one day for the other. Comp days, absolutely not. I knew some places that wouldn't do it, and I'm like, well, I'm not working. So easier said than done. It helps us to preserve our compassion and saves our energy for situations that are truly needed with your presence. Another example for this that I could say personally is I'm very careful about the phone calls I take at home after hours. How many people here have been approached by family and friends to be their therapist? Come on, there's got to be more than that, right? And it's a very hard boundary, but I typically at night don't answer a lot of phone calls unless they're really immediate or they need my discernment because I want to conserve my energy and my compassion. And I talk to people all day long. So it's important for me to have time when I'm not talking, listening, hearing. Listening with a third ear. People have always said to me, oh gosh, you just listen to people. Okay. It is a skill to listen to an individual or a family with a third ear. And it's mentally draining at times, and it takes a lot of energy. So it is a skill and a power, a superpower that we learn to hone. But again, the energy from it does get drained after a while. So our next villain is the silent saboteur. So the person who sabotages. So this villain says, you don't need help. Just keep going. Sometimes I am my own worst enemy. I don't need enemies, I am my own worst one, right? So that's from the silent, the person who sabotages. This is a lack of self-awareness. The mask, wearing the mask too long, we ignore the warning signs. Exhaustion becomes, the norm. You're running on fumes and it becomes the norm. And an example of this is the bereavement counselor who starts snapping at coworkers and losing patience with families, but tells them it's just a busy week. It's just a busy week. They don't recognize this as early signs of compassion fatigue. So it's kind of like, in a way, self-sabotage. I don't need help. I'm okay. And, I have frozen shoulder in this arm because I don't ask for help. I ask for help carrying the groceries. I don't ask for help playing things out of my car. I will tell you, being a person who is a military spouse and then widowed at a young age, I don't like asking help from people. Especially when you learn that you're by yourself and you have to do things by yourself. You don't really want to rely on people again. So learning to rely on people and asking for help is extremely important. And that brings us to the power of self-awareness. So how the sabotager, and I love Lego Batman. If you ever get a chance to watch Lego Batman, we're going to be watching a little bit of it tonight. Lego Batman, in its humor, has a lot of deep meaning and healing. And Dr. Phyllis Kosminski, who wrote the book on attachment-informed grief therapy, actually did a chapter in Superhero Grief on Lego Batman and attachment. And, Batman and attachment, but she used Lego Batman. So I always love this because Lego Batman certainly has a big ego, and he says, always be yourself. Unless you be Batman, then always be Batman. So he's a little egotistical, but self-awareness is certainly super important. But as I said at the beginning of our lecture today, self-awareness without action behind self-awareness is just self-awareness. So I'm self-aware that I can have problems with boundaries. That's really good. Insight is important. But what do you do with that insight? Because if not, then you're not really doing anything to change. And that's another funny song they use in Lego Batman is the song by Michael Jackson, Make a Change. And the power in how to use this to unmask the villain is that, naming the lie that whispers. You unmask exhaustion as a false norm. You recognize the early signs of exhaustion and burnout. Empowers intervention, not collapse. It's sometimes really hard to see when you're exhausted. This is why accountability buddies are really important. A trusted accountability buddy. Someone who you're going to hear it from. I don't necessarily think I'd hear it from my kids or my spouse because I'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm busy. But hearing it from my good accountability friend, like coming here last week saying, Jill, did you get out today? And because I was having a problem with my shoulder, did you go out today and did you go for acupressure on your shoulder? No, I will do that when I get back. You need to go today. So having that person reminds you, or notes to yourself. Sometimes people stick up notes to themselves, little Post-it notes. Have you done something for yourself today? It reminds you that restoration is not a luxury, it's fuel for sustainability, it empowers choices. Exhaustion is a signal, not an identity. Again, we live in a culture now where we're working 24/7, working too much, working too many. It is praised and lauded. The compassionate reframe is, if I'm weak if I rest. Rest is a strength. It equips me to rise again. And that goes back to our very first slide, is you see Superman sleeping. I think that encapsulates it all. The culture of silence. This is a villain that talking about mental health is weakness. I know we have one of the tables here today whose mission is to go out and teach people that talking about mental health is not weakness. How this villain appears is stigma around vulnerability, fear of judgment, undervalued profession. We are undervalued. I was just talking this with a colleague that, a lot of times what we do as counselors and social workers, I always get, when I first got into the social work, became a social worker, was, do you go take kids out of their homes? You're one of those. You work in a hospital. Honestly, if you work in a hospital, which is hierarchical, kind of like the military is, a lot of hierarchical organizations, you got like doctors, nurses, blah, 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 blah. You go down the hierarchy, social workers about like right there. You have to I had to earn my respect at the table at an oncology center. I had to earn it. So a real-world example is an embalmer quietly struggles with insomnia and intrusive thoughts after handling a series of traumatic cases. They consider reaching out for counseling but decide against it, fear their colleagues would question their professionalism. Again, I'm going to reiterate, nobody needs to know your business. If you have benefits, try to use your at least EAP benefits. Talking about, they actually created, I don't know if you know this, but psychotherapy was actually born out of what they used to do in the Catholic religion was confessional. They somehow found that when people talked about things that bothered them, it became therapeutic. They released them. And this is where talk therapy actually comes from. So we need to really reframe, just like we go to the gym for prevention, to work out. We go to the doctor to prevent things like early detection, to prevent diseases, to use sunscreen. That mental health is really about mental wellness, that we should be working out the stresses of it's just like going to the gym, is working out our brain, working out our body, working out our mind, working out the things that stress us, instead of that you're broken and there's something wrong with you. So I think as a culture in our profession, really valuing that and walking the walk, not just talking the talk, is, really supporting that in our clients. But it's hard. It's hard. You don't want to in some way let other people know that, maybe she's so dysregulated, she shouldn't be doing her job. But it's important that you know that you could reach out for help and support. So the tool that Batman brings to this is really that to bring voice, to advocate. Be part of organizations that help break the stigma about mental health awareness. Normalize conversations. When I talk to colleagues, I often say to them, that must be really hard for you. How do you balance things? I talk a little bit how they're doing professionally. And advocate for systematic supports. You can't do this in isolation. Speak openly. I think I'm being pretty open today about some of the emotional tolls of grief work. Model therapy supervision or support groups. We should actually maybe have more peer-to-peer professional groups. Anybody here involved in a peer-to-peer group there you talk about your emotional stuff with other colleagues? I see a hand up over there. I see one hand up. All right, there's a gap here. I think it's really important that we get together with our colleagues to have our own support group. I know that American Foundation of Suicide Prevention actually runs support groups for professionals who have been affected by suicide loss in their own family, but also suicide loss of clients. Exceptionally important that they run peer support groups. Advocate for staff debriefings and wellness policies. I know that I've gone to a couple of different in-services this week and even last week where we sat down with grief and loss professionals. I said, you know what? It was so nice just to, even for an hour, sit down and talk among my other staff members, talk about these guided questions you're asking me, and to have that kind of space, to really be able to debrief. Debriefing is so important in the work we do. And educate communities about the hidden labor of our profession. So this is a nice, this is for you. You can look at it, the villain and why it matters. I made this for you as a handout. And now we're going to talk a little bit about why we're using our human powers. I have to look at the clock. So I'm going to speed along here because I might not get through all of these. That the villains of self-care represent the forces that quietly erode our well-being. Each villain has a certain cycle they bring. They drain energy. They silence emotions. They normalize overworking. They impair our ability to give competent care, which is going to affect our sustainability in our profession. I don't know about you, but I went back to teaching as a social worker because I wanted to know that at this point in my life that my legacy would be to then help train up the next generation of social workers. I'm very passionate about my profession and what I do. But in order to have sustainability, we also have to really be able to talk about, incorporate, and actually act on self-care. Left unchallenged, when professionals lose rest and resilience, authenticity, and support the families we serve, it has a direct impact on our care. And again, they reduce sustainability. And there's a rippling effect. They weaken our family bonds, they diminish the quality of care, and they drive experienced professionals away from the field. I know a lot of my mental health colleagues in the last 5 years, and even at one point myself, when I was becoming overworked, overstressed, overburdened, living through a pandemic with clients who are living through a pandemic, I seriously thought about leaving myself. So it was really important that I had to reset, renew, reframe. So the power of vulnerability, being vulnerable, is our greatest superpower. I know it doesn't feel that way, but naming these villains, kind of, and knowing them, and even refreshing these about you, even though you know them, makes the visible invisible. It's an ethical imperative that protects both the worker and the families who depend on this. So let's see what Superman has to say when he feels depleted, begins to lose faith, and he's misunderstood as the man of steel, as people think he's impenetrable. We're going to close with this.
You were out there helping them?
I thought I was. They've always been wrong about me. I get scared, but that is being human. And that's my greatest strength.
Rated PG-13, only in theaters July 11th.
I get scared. That is being human, and that's my greatest strength. So I want to leave today's conversation on, in social work we say be the change. Be the change you want to see in the world. I think Mahatma Gandhi said that. Be the change. You can only change yourself. No one's going to change you. That's all about control, right? We can only control ourselves. Be the change. So in order to reframe our superpowers, this is actually the Flash and Batman, and he's getting overwhelmed. Barry Allen's new to working on the Justice League, and they're fighting Darkseid, and there's all these different monsters around, and Barry gets really scared, and he says, I can't do anything, and I feel overwhelmed. And Batman says to him, save one person. Just save one person. It's kind of like the starfish. You see a million starfish on the sand. Maybe you can't save them all, but you can throw one back. And so we're framing strength. Strength is not you're strong all the time. Strength is not super strength. Strength is not being impenetrable. Sometimes strength requires the smallest acts that we do as our greatest of strengths. Changing one behavior, changing one thought, changing one emotion. The strongest substance on earth is actually a spider's web. In context to size, the web of a spider is actually very, very, very strong given the context to size, but it looks so small. And sometimes our biggest strengths are very small things that we do for ourselves. When you leave here today, I invite you to think about one thing that you've learned about yourself today in self-care and try to change one thing. It does have a ripple effect. And as a social worker, our superpower is looking at things from the systems perspective. Real quick, look at your daily practices. Very, very important. What can I do to regulate and restore my body and mind? Sleep, emotional regulation, boundaries with caffeine, alcohol, overcommitment. Give yourself mini rest rituals, breaks. On a meso, relational practices. Who are my people? And how can we take care of each other? When I worked in the hospital, my other social worker, she was Jewish. I'm Catholic. What we did was we decided, because we all didn't have the days off, that she and I would trade off pagers and cover the holidays for each other. That was our teamwork with each other. And so she was part of my people, my tribe, that we helped each other out. Your relationships, your support networks, your spiritual care, your workplace. advocating for flexibility, using your benefits, peer support. Macro level, how on an individual level? What the most important question is, how can I align or advocate with systems that make self-care easier for everybody? Looking on policy, healthcare access, advocating for supportive workplaces, a cultural shift, normalize self-care for yourself. Talk about it. Talk about your mental wellness and well-being. Challenge workaholism. I go to conferences and I'm with my peers, and like, oh gosh, it's just in the 15 research projects I was on and all these writing assignments. I've gotten caught up with that. I'm like, I'm not doing enough. So the workaholism is kind of reinforced and praised by the community, and promote safer workplace environments. But we can't do this from an ecological perspective without superhero leadership. Self-care is not just about individuals, okay? It's the system itself must protect, support, and value people who are caring for grieving people. It comes from the top down. It shows the team that caring for individuals is allowed and important. It's an ethical imperative. And I'm gonna say today that I feel that is a very strong culture and climate of leadership, that the grief seminar for these 3 hours focused on self-care for you all. I think that is sending a message that we care about you, we care about self-care, and that is a leadership, that is leading by example. So I just want to give big kudos to choosing self-care and heroic self-care as a topic for today's, from a leadership perspective. Again, from these macro practices, what structures and policies can we create to ensure our staff are supported and cared for the families they serve? And here's some superhero archetypes. I'm running low on time. Some lessons learned that, Batman's, hyper-vigilant. He's duty-obsessed. Lesson is connection is strength. Share the burden. Spider-Man is guilt-driven. Boundaries protect his sustainability. Captain America self-sacrifices, carries the world on his shoulders. He knows service is noble, but he must take time for himself. Wonder Woman typically always overextends herself, carries her struggles as her own. She learns that strength comes from love, but she also needs to retreat. She has her own sanctuary. So as we leave here today, one of the slides, I want you to find the hero within you. Everyone has a superhero inside themselves just waiting to be discovered. This was sent to me by a bereaved mother who actually read Superhero Grief when it first came out. She sent me this clip. So I'd like you to identify any superhero archetypes and their self-care. And think of a hero's journey, the story, real or fictional. It could be Harry Potter, it could be someone from the Bible, it could be from spiritual, it could be Star Wars, it could be an everyday hero who you know. And who are their villains? Can you identify them and apply them in your own heroic self-care? What one self-care behavior, emotion, thought, emotion, or behavior can you change today? Okay, mine has been, I want to start smelling the flowers before pushing them up. That is a big mantra I keep telling myself. So I'm trying to do more things for myself that bring me joy, that restore my life, that are life-affirming, because we sit in a world that also is very death-affirming. And death-affirming needs balance with life-affirming. So it is the circle of life. So we spend a lot of time on one side of it. So I need to pull myself to the other side, the restoration side. How will you do this? Make your goals specific and measurable. And lastly, because every superhero, even with the truest and most selfless heart, needs hope. Hope is the light that lifts us out of our darkness. The S is hope. Our self-care awareness and plan gives us the hope and the plan for ourselves. I want you to really think about leaving here today and creating a plan for yourself, even if it's one thing. Our hope gives us grounding to care for ourselves while caring for others. This is our legacy for a future generation of counselors, therapists, and grief workers. So thank you for having me here this afternoon. It's been an honor this morning. It's been an honor to talk to you. And thank you to the McAfee Funeral Homes for having me here today, and all our sponsors. So I hope I bring you hope, and I hope after here today that you could be a hero in your own self-care. Thank you.